everybody, happy Canada Day and welcome back to week 2 of our Alpha online message series. We are so happy that you're here. If you joined us last week, you probably have like a handle on how the night's gonna run, but just in case you didn't, don't worry, I'm gonna give you a little bit of background information before we jump in and get started. First off though, just in case you don't know who I am, I'll take a minute and introduce myself. My name is Olivia. I'm a youth ministry assistant at our Fanshawe location, which means I spend a lot of time hanging out with students and writing or preparing message content for our different teaching series. When I'm not working at North Park, I love to read and write. Books are my favorite thing. I actually have a book of my own out. I'm an author. I'm also getting married next month, which is really exciting. What else? I love working outside. That makes it sound like I love gardening, which is not true. I love sitting outside and doing work. I like going for walks and I love the beach. So that's a little bit about me. If you happen to see me on the street sometime in the future, wave and I will say hello. I love chatting to people. But back to Alpha. Again, if you were here last week, you probably already know like kind of how the night ran. But if you forgot, or just in case, I will remind you that the Alpha videos have a couple of questions built into the middle. So they'll ask a question and then the video will pause while people answer. Now, because we're doing this as a large group, we're not gonna take those pauses. So what we want you guys to do is get a pen and a piece of paper, write down or jot down some notes on your answers to those questions. And then at the end of the video, when we hop on our Zoom call, then we're gonna go through the answers. So right now, if you don't have a pen and a pad of paper, go get it. You're gonna need it. The last thing I'm gonna kind of run you through before we get down to business is our Alpha snack, which I'm actually filming. So I will introduce myself, my video. Basically, the reason we eat at Alpha is because community is very important and community is often experienced over a meal or while sharing food together. Of course, because we are in a pandemic, we cannot meet in person, we cannot literally share food, but we can all create, prepare, and enjoy the same snack. So we're gonna do that now.
Hello again, and welcome to tonight's Alpha Snack, which is in honor of Canada Day celebrations, ice cream sundaes. As you can see here, I have loads of chocolatey peanut butter treats ice cream, which is basically a sundae in and of itself with all the chocolate and peanut butter that's in there. But for the sake of this video, we will go ahead and demonstrate some potential toppings for your potential ice cream sundaes too. So grab your favorite flavor or brand of ice cream and let's get started. You can add whatever toppings you want to your ice cream sundae, but here we have just a couple of different options. We've got some nuts, chocolate chips, peanut butter, graham crackers, and a banana. I actually do not like fruit on my ice cream at all, pretty much any kind of fruit. I just think because the ice cream's so sweet, it makes the fruit taste bland. It's not my thing. However, Hannah loves bananas and loves bananas on ice cream, and I'm guessing a lot of you do too, so I will sacrifice and put a banana in this mixture. You probably can see that I have a theme, chocolate and peanut butter. I do, it's just a fact. Okay, let us add some toppings to our sundae.
are a lot of different factors that make someone famous. For example, how many people know their name, or the people they hang out with, or the things that they've done.
Yeah, or you could look at things like how many Instagram followers someone has. Like, for example, I've got quite a few more followers than Ben does.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really care about that sort of thing much, but...
Right. If it's just for an example, then it's good to note that, Pikachu has about 100,000 more followers than Jason does, so.
As I'm thinking about it, it's not really a good example. People aren't really using Instagram anymore.
Oh, I think people use Instagram.
Kind of passe.
I use it. Dan, you use Instagram? Yeah, Dan uses it, I use it.
Okay. So if you consider everyone who's ever lived, Jesus Christ is arguably the most famous. Jesus is so famous that his name is used as a swear word. We don't use anyone else's name as a swear word. Benedict Cumberbatch!
Taylor Swift!
Oh, Justin Bieber, that's hot!
Pikachu!
Think about this with me for a minute. Jesus' life literally divides history. Our calendars are based on his life. History is divided into two main eras. Until recently, we use the terms BC and AD. BC stands for before Christ, and AD is Latin for Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord. His influence is hard to miss. More songs have been sung to, more paintings have been painted of, and more books have been written about Jesus than anyone else. Time magazine named him the most significant person in history.
I think it'd be snowboarding.
I grew up watching Disney Channel and everything, and I want to be on one of those sitcoms where I can make children smile.
The next biggest technological invention. Like, I want to be the next Steve Jobs.
Singing. I would want to be famous for singing. I would want to be able to meet Beyonce and us be friends.
Fashion designer, for sure.
But doing backflips, because I can't do a backflip.
You want to be famous for backflips?
Yeah, why not?
Being able to taste a food and know exactly what's in it, like a food connoisseur.
I don't want to be famous. I really don't.
Okay, not money. Ooh, what would I want to be famous for? That's a good question.
Being the best dancer.
Performing, on Broadway.
Baseball player.
For my dashing good looks.
Up, we are on our way to Israel right now. It's so exciting.
I heard they have really good food in Israel.
Oh yeah, and it's also the place that Jesus lived. That's the main reason why we're going.
That's why we're going.
Hey, if we can get some good food, that's pretty exciting too.
Awesome.
Now you may be wondering, why are we talking so much about Jesus? Well, first, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is the centerpiece of the Christian faith. And Jesus' resurrection not only suggests that God exists, but that God should be seen and understood through the lens of Jesus.
So who is Jesus? And what historical evidence is there for his life, death, and resurrection? When it comes to the question of Jesus' existence, there are no serious historians who would suggest the man Jesus didn't live. There are more mentions of Jesus in ancient literature than Tiberius Caesar, who ruled the Roman Empire at the time.
And one first-century historian named Josephus, who wasn't a Christian himself, described Jesus as a wise man, a teacher, and a doer of wonderful works. Jesus is also mentioned by other ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius.
So there is evidence from outside the New Testament that he lived here in Israel. But most of the evidence for the things Jesus said and did comes from eyewitness reports recorded in the New Testament. The New Testament is a collection of books and letters that make up a large part of the Bible. The Bible is divided into the Old Testament, which was written before Jesus' birth, and the New Testament, written after his birth. 4 of these books, called the Gospels, were written specifically about Jesus' life from eyewitness accounts.
Now, of course, the New Testament was written a long time ago, so it's good for us to ask, how do we know that what we have now hasn't been changed over the years? And we can find an answer to that question through a science called textual criticism. Here's Peter and Jazzy to explain how it works.
Okay, so textual criticism works by comparing ancient manuscripts to discover the original wording. Basically, the more copies of a manuscript there are, and the closer they are to the date of the original manuscript, the more confident we can be. For example, Herodotus and Thucydides were ancient historians who wrote in the 5th century BC. Now, the earliest copies we have of their writings are from around 900 AD, so there's more than a 1300-year gap, and we only have 8 copies of their writings. Yet no classical scholar would doubt that these writings have come down to us in a form that's true to their original copies.
And this is the case with many other ancient works as well. For example, Livy's Roman History, 900-year gap with 20 copies. Caesar's Gallic War, 950-year gap with 9 to 10 copies. And Tacitus, 1,000-year gap with just 20 copies. And then we come to the New Testament, and what we see here is that the time gap is significantly shorter. It was written between 40 to 100 AD. And the earliest manuscript was written as early as 130 AD. And there are 5,309 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin, and 9,300 others, making the New Testament totally unique amongst other ancient books.
Textual critic F.J.A. Hort said this: "In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone amongst ancient prose writings." So, we can look confidently to what's written in the New Testament.
What we know from inside and outside the New Testament is that Jesus was a Jewish man, born here in Israel in the 1st century. He lived in many ways like most of us. He ate, slept, laughed, and cried, and he would have walked along roads not far from here.
Many people today would say, okay, he lived, and maybe he was a great religious teacher, but no more than that. But there's evidence that suggests that Jesus was more than just a great religious teacher. The first piece of evidence we'll look at is what he said about himself.
Okay, so what did Jesus say about himself? Because when other religious leaders might say, here's what's true, Jesus says, I am the truth. And when others might say, here's how you find full life, Jesus says, I am the life.
Jesus said, I am the bread of life, as if to say, I'm the one who can fulfill that spiritual hunger in your heart. All of us carry around things like guilt or worry, fear and anxiety. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus said, if you receive me, you receive God. If you welcome me, you welcome God. And if you've seen me, you've seen God.
At the heart of Christianity is a message of forgiveness. On many occasions, Jesus said to people, your sins are forgiven. And this statement would have made the religious leaders of his day furious because they knew that only God can forgive sins. So for Jesus to say something like that was to put himself in the same place as God.
One of the most direct claims Jesus made is recorded in John's Gospel. He said, I and the Father are one. When the religious leaders heard him say this, they were so angry they wanted to stone him. But before they could, Jesus said, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? We are not stoning you for any good works, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Those who were around him, who heard him and opposed him, said, you're claiming to be God. Makes me think of what Bono said when he was asked about Jesus.
Hold on, dude. I don't think that everyone's heard of Bono.
Bono? Yeah, he's the lead singer of U2. People have heard of him.
I'm just meaning younger people, like maybe older guys like you and Timmy over here. But younger people, like Dan, have you heard of Bono?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, see?
That's the guy that Ben always talks about, right?
There it is. He doesn't know.
Bono was asked in an interview about his faith in Jesus. The reporter said, Christ has his rank among the world's great thinkers or good religious teachers, but Son of God? Isn't that a little far-fetched? Bono replied, I don't think you're let off easily by saying he was a great thinker or philosopher, because actually he went around saying he was the Messiah. That's why he was crucified. He was crucified because he said he was the Son of God. So he either, in my view, was the Son of God or he was nuts. And I find it hard to accept that all the millions and millions of lives, half the earth for nearly 2,000 years, have felt their lives touched and inspired by some nutter. I don't believe it.
This has been around for a while.
I don't know too much about Christianity, but I can say it probably because of his words, how his teachings.
I think it's the whole martyr for a cause type of thing.
I mean, I think that level of sacrifice people resonate with.
I think generations of telling stories and ritual.
Because somebody wrote a book about him.
I never really thought of him that way. I never really thought of him as someone famous.
Is he famous? I don't know.
He's pretty famous.
Okay.
He kind of represents the ideal prophet that is encaptured in so many different religions and creeds across the world.
He's the guy that has forgiven all of our sins. Like, he died on the cross for all of us, right?
Because he's the only one that overcame death.
It's because he healed a lot of people.
Sandals.
Sandals. Great sandals.
What I do think is to do aggressive propagation of Christianity.
It's a character that lots of people just confide in, don't they? So I think that's probably why he's quite big.
Hey, what's up guys? We're back on the move on a rocky bus and we are just pulling into Nazareth. It's changed a lot, but this is the place that Jesus grew up, so it's pretty cool.
So we should get some food.
Oh yeah, well, we're definitely gonna get some food.
Guys, we're gonna get food.
It's been a long bus ride. Here's the update. We found a spot to eat food and to film our next shot. So you got the crew behind me there.
Perfect.
And some food behind me.
Falafel.
Ben's happy.
I love falafel.
It's gonna be great.
I think when you look at everything Jesus said about himself, it's clear that he did make that claim, that he was a person whose identity was God.
Yeah, and that's a massive claim, and it needs to be tested. So let's look at what evidence there is to back it up.
One of the first things you'll notice when reading about Jesus is that he lived a miraculous life. He turned water into wine at a wedding. He multiplied food to feed thousands, and he healed those who were sick. We're on the move with the crew today. Gonna be a good day, looking forward to it.
That's the Sea of Galilee.
This is the Sea of Galilee right here. Is it bigger or smaller than I thought? I don't know.
Thousands of people gathered on this mountain to hear Jesus give one of his most famous teachings, the Sermon on the Mount. In this message, he said, "Do to others as you'd have them do to you. Love your neighbor as yourself, and love your enemies."
Jesus' teaching has been the foundation for entire cultures and civilizations in the West. Many of the laws we have today were originally based on things he taught. After 2,000 years, it still hasn't been improved on. One of my favorite moments in Jesus' life is recorded in the New Testament by Jesus' friend Matthew. A man who suffered from leprosy ran up to Jesus asking to be healed.
Now, leprosy is a brutal disease. It destroys nerve endings and often led to disfigurement and the loss of limbs. People with leprosy were often treated as outcasts because others were afraid to go near them.
This man was so desperate that he knelt on the ground begging Jesus to heal him. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man, which is something no one else would do. And instantly the leprosy was gone.
This is such a great picture of the character of Jesus. Not only was Jesus able to miraculously heal the man, he was willing to touch someone that no one else would. Jesus spent time with social outcasts, and he didn't let popular opinion control how he acted or treated others. He was friends with the marginalized and those that some might think God couldn't possibly love. Time magazine named him the most persistent symbol of purity, selflessness, and love in the history of Western humanity.
Okay, so while our primary source of information about Jesus is in the New Testament, we also see references to Jesus in the Old Testament, and that's the next piece of evidence we're going to take a look at. Jesus' fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies, specific things about Jesus' life predicted in advance. There's been no one else in history that's ever had a whole collection of books written about them before they were born. Jesus fulfilled over 300 Old Testament prophecies, things like where he would grow up or the family he would be born into. And at one point, he fulfilled 29 of them in a single day.
Now, after hearing something like that, you might be thinking to yourself, well, maybe Jesus was just a con man who set out to deliberately deceive people. He could have just read about all these prophecies and then set out to do what they said he should do. But there are actually two problems with this theory. The first problem is the sheer number of prophecies he fulfilled. And the second problem is the fact that, humanly speaking, he actually had no control over many of these things. In fact, there were prophecies about the exact way he would die, the place of his burial, and even about the place of his birth.
As news spread about Jesus, his message of forgiveness, his love for the outcast, and the powerful miracles he performed, people came from all over to see him. But the religious and political leaders of his day were threatened by his growing popularity, so they plotted to have him arrested and killed. They handed him over to the Roman officials and put him on trial as a rebel against Rome.
The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, interrogated him and said he couldn't find any fault with him. But there was so much pressure from the crowd that he gave in and he handed Jesus over to be executed by crucifixion. They put nails in his hands and in his feet, and they hung him on a cross to die with criminals on his right and his left. He was pronounced dead by Roman executioners. His body was taken down from the cross and put in a tomb in a well-known location just outside of Jerusalem. But what we see in the New Testament is the story of Jesus' life doesn't end there.
I think people think of Jesus as the long-haired guy in the movies.
With sandals in a room?
With a beard, who's having a hard time.
Most people think Jesus is white. I don't know if that's true.
I think people think that Jesus is just the guy on the cross.
Growing up, I've heard that Jesus is a really forgiving person, like he's a friend.
A wise person that, kind of wandered and taught and everything. Some people think he's the Son of God. Some people think that he's the Savior.
God's son. He's kind of like the connection between God and people.
I see him more as a historical figure.
A good dude, and he was a prophet.
Big, powerful guy in the sky.
I don't know. I mean, he's got a lot of rules.
They think he's a prophet. They think he's a good man. He's done a lot of good deeds. But a lot of people don't recognize him that he is also God.
People kind of think like Jesus as same as God. They kind of put him in the same level as God. I don't know.
The final piece of evidence we're going to look at is Jesus' conquest of death. The physical resurrection of Jesus is the cornerstone of Christianity.
And this matters to every single one of us because we're all going to die. When you go to a funeral and you see the coffin being lowered into the ground, it looks absolutely final. And it is. Unless Jesus died, was buried in a tomb, and then was raised to life. In which case, the grave has lost its power and death has been conquered.
So I grew up in a family, there was no faith, no religion, no God, no prayer, no Bible. It was just, didn't talk about it. My dad was so atheistic that when my older brother was born a few years before me, his name's Matthew, and he said, we have to spell his name with one T as not to be biblical. I don't want it to be spelt like it's in the Bible. And so literally on his birth certificate, his name is spelled with one T. And then when I was 17, I was in high school, and I met a guy named Chris in woodworking class, and he came up to me and he's like, listen, this guy was, womanizer, drug dealer, whatever, the whole thing. And that's why I hung out with him. And he said, listen, I got my life changed by Jesus. And I'm like, well, what's this about? And so I began kind of exploring as a skeptic, which is what I was. So when Chris started talking to me about Christianity, as someone who grew up in an atheistic home, I wasn't just going to accept what he was going to say. So I was like, okay, did this actually happen historically? What's the evidence? Because I'm not a super emotional person. I'm not going to just buy into something because I get swept up in the emotion of it. So then what that made me do is I got to go investigate this stuff. So when I was 19 was the first time I actually walked into a church. And I found skeptics there, skeptics who were actually serious about answering the deep questions. It was all these people going, yeah, I have that question too, but here's what I found, this legit thing, and let's compare this and this. I started to open up the old Bible that my grandfather had given me. Because Christianity functioned around this person and not just ideas and philosophies, I had to figure out, did this guy even exist to begin with? I explored, I studied, I looked at it. So I saw in the Gospels he obviously existed, but then began realizing there's people outside of the Bible who have no Christian agenda who were all claiming he existed. And it was in that exploration that I actually came to realize that Christianity is not emotional. It's not true because I want it to be true. It's true because the actual tomb is empty. It was based on a historical event. And that's what I realized was different about it. So I began to realize that this is either the most important thing in the universe or it is the dumbest thing. It can't be half interesting. So after I had studied, looked at the evidence, I came to the conclusion that this wasn't just hopeful thinking, wishful thinking, that it was actually true.
There are 4 pieces of evidence for Jesus' resurrection. First, his tomb was empty. When Jesus' close friends went to visit his tomb on the 3rd day, his body wasn't there. People have come up with all kinds of explanations for this, but none of them stand up against thoughtful evaluation. For example, maybe the authorities stole the body. But if they did, then they would have shown that they had it when people start saying that Jesus had risen from the dead.
Or others might say, okay, then robbers stole the body. When the disciples heard that Jesus had been seen, they ran to the tomb. Jesus' body wasn't there, but the grave clothes that he'd been wrapped in were still there. These would have been the only valuable things that the robbers might have taken. Even the piece that had been around Jesus' head had been folded up and put off to the side. The second piece of evidence for Jesus' resurrection is his presence with the disciples. Jesus was seen more than 11 times after his resurrection, and on one occasion by a group of around 500 people. Now some might say, well, that could have been a hallucination. But think about it. 500 people can't hallucinate the same thing.
The third piece of evidence is the transformation we see in the disciples. Here's a group of people who were devastated that their leader had been killed, and they were afraid themselves that they would be arrested and killed. And then suddenly, they were transformed. Instead of being discouraged and fearful, they were full of hope and courage. And they were so confident in the message, they went around telling everyone, Jesus is alive.
And many of the disciples were later killed or tortured because they wouldn't stop spreading this message. Why would someone be prepared to die for something they knew wasn't true? But the disciples believed it was true. It had transformed their life, and this extraordinary movement has spread all over the world.
And that's the fourth piece of evidence. Jesus is still impacting lives today. There are now more than 2.4 billion Christians around the world, representing every ethnic, economic, and social background. The disciples spoke about a risen Jesus, and there are billions of Christians around the world today who also speak of an encounter with the risen Jesus Christ. So how do we respond to all this? It seems clear that Jesus really did claim to be a man whose identity was God. And when we look at the evidence, his teaching, his life, his character, his fulfillment of prophecy, and his resurrection from the dead, it all provides strong support that what Jesus said about himself was true. And this truth isn't just head knowledge, it's truth we can experience in our hearts. I've experienced a relationship with Jesus, and it's changed my life. And that's what Jesus wants for each one of us, life, and life in all its fullness. God has revealed himself in Jesus. Jesus really is who he claimed to be. He really did rise from the dead. And that means there's hope beyond this life, and there's hope for this life. And that's what I've found, and you can too.
Mark?
Benedict Cumberbatch! Taylor Swift! Pikachu!
Yeah, it's burning, it's burning, it's burning.
I did it again. I didn't mean to that time.
Mother Teresa, man! Sting! Khloe Kardashian! Samuel L. Jackson!
Buzz Lightyear!
Oh!
Did you just... Sorry, too far?
Pikachu!
Okay everyone, welcome back from that week 2 video of Alpha. I really hope you guys are enjoying following along with the hosts who are ridiculously funny and are learning a lot about Jesus and the basics of our faith, our Christianity. Now comes the exciting part when we go into our groups and have discussion about what we've just watched. If you're at one of our other locations, not Fanshawe, then you need to contact your leaders to find out how you're doing discussion. But for those of you who are at North Park Fanshawe, the link to our Zoom small groups has been sent out in the email that you have already received. So whatever campus you're on, make sure you find your way to your group now for discussion. And I really just encourage you to share openly and honestly about what you're hearing, what you're learning, and what you're wondering. It's totally okay to have questions about this stuff, even if you've been a Christian for a long time. I'm actually doing the adult alpha with some of my friends right now, and sometimes I have questions that it brings to the surface, and then we can have really interesting conversations. So don't be afraid to ask questions, to explore. I really hope you enjoy your discussion.